What is it you want, Barry? What do you want? You want the moon? Just say the word and I'll throw a lasso around it and pull it down.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, dying times here.
Come with me if you want to live.
That's it, man. Game over, man. Game over.
The Force will be with you, always.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to 20th Century Geek. I'm your regular host, Scott Weatherly, and today I'm being joined by a newbie, someone new coming to 20th Century Towers to talk story time. We're going to be talking story in a minute, but first, introduce yourself. Blake, how are you doing? You okay, mate?
Yeah, hi, Scott. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm glad to finally be here. I've seen you on my radar in the Comics in Motion verse radar for a while, so I'm glad to be able to make an appearance.
Good, I'm
Blake. I've been on Tony's podcast for a bit, and I heard your episode with him just today. I live in London. I'm a psychosocial student at Goldsmiths. That's kind of what I'm doing at the moment. I'm looking to become a psychotherapist, and I love stories. You know, psychotherapy, and that's also always about listening to people's stories. I used to work in film and TV for many years.
Oh, really?
So that's stories as well, isn't it? So I'm glad to be here, and this is a kind of a good intro, I suppose. A little short story, although I must say it was not the type of thing I usually read. Let's just say that much.
No, we'll get into the story in a minute, because the story we're going to talk about today is Ramsey Campbell's Again from 1981, the year I was born. So that's quite cool. Ramsey Campbell, I've read little bits and pieces over the years. He is part of, especially this era, sort of what they call like the splatter gore paperback boom of the sort of late 70s and early 80s. And this story doesn't disappoint on the gross factor. And we'll get to that. Some of his sort of like peers were like Sean Houston, James Herbert, those sorts of things. But the story is, again, as I say, in the story is quite simple. In its setup, a man's taken home for a walk in the countryside. He's a bit bored of the countryside. He's not entirely sure why he's gone for a walk in the countryside. When he comes across a house, an overgrown garden, and he finds a woman is struggling to get into the house. He believes that she's lost her key. And so in helping her, he climbs through the window for her and starts to explore the house, looking for the key to open the front door. He finds that the key is actually snapped off in the lock, and the house is filthy and covered with dirt, and there's the sound of flies and moaning in the house. As he goes from room to room, he finds more and more disturbing things, until eventually he opens a locked room, and in there he finds something that turns his stomach. And I'm going to leave it there, and we'll get to the surprise. Just to let everyone know, there are going to be spoilers. So if you this is the point where you can jump off and go read this. Blake, you found it online, didn't you? Tony found it, so you had that. Yeah, I've got that link. So that link will be in
the archive.
That's right. Yeah. So the link for that is in the notes, so it's available. I read it actually. The reason I came across it, I'm gonna do a bit of a brag. I've got the Folio Society, the Folio Book of Horror Stories, which is a collection of short horror stories, and I love a good Folio Society book. So I sort of picked it from there, and let's start with it first. So just we're going to get into it. Spoilers, all right? So if this is your last chance. One more chance.
Go and read it.
You
know what? I read it and I also listened to a reading of it at the same time. Yeah, I found there's a few people narrate it, but I found this one guy with this really brooding northern accent, and nice. It was really cool. Yeah, but also like it kind of set me on a linear path, so I couldn't jump off the ride. Be like, oh no, I can't do this. So yeah, it was really good.
Ride's a good example. But let's get into it then. So right, we're going for it. Like, what were your thoughts then? What's your thoughts on this one? Did you like it? What were your, you said it wasn't something you usually read, but what's your initial thoughts?
Yeah, so you put out a few stories on our Discord for us to pick up, and I landed on that one. The other ones sounded really interesting, but the horror element really enticed me because I'm like not a horror person at all. So I thought, oh, why don't I attack something, like confront my shadow, as I say in therapeutic speak. Because I grew up in a Christian family, and so that wasn't really our bag. And even like that, that's not my world anymore. It's just I don't know. But you know what I do? If I were to go for horror, I would prefer the kind of psychological, kind of
the thriller,
anticipatory, the dread. It's still
Yes.
terrifying, but like I prefer that over the kind of blood and gore stuff. And this story was very much that. I thought it's the way Ramsey Campbell writes around everything. The way one of the things that struck me first was how how Bryant, the main character, is meandering through the countryside. It like mirrored how Ramsey Campbell writes the story. He's meandering around the obvious. It's like a whirlpool, you know, of this thing we're drawn to, and you feel like you're just on this inevitable journey towards the center.
That's I like that actually, like this idea of a whirlpool, because one of the things reading this book, and obviously, you know, I'm definitely more of a proponent of horror, was one of the things I found that's like, you know, almost comedic is as you're reading this, the moment he enters the house, you just sort of like head slapping, like, no, like this is wrong, leave. Like every time he's like, he describes what they go into a room, he's like, it's covered in like a, you know, like a sheen of dust, like the bed's filthy, and there's, you know, there's this stuff, and you're like, right, this is wrong, just leave. This shouldn't be. And you, like you say, he keeps circling, getting closer and closer to this terror. And so, like, yeah, it's sort of constantly sort of like you feel that dread of like there's something else waiting, and it's an interesting payoff.
I wonder, had I not known the genre beforehand, if I would have had that anticipation at the start, because I knew even when he's just roaming the fields and he's kind of it looks exactly like what it was, an overgrown railway divested of its line. Sometimes it led beneath bridges, hollow as whistles, and then it seemed to trap him beneath the banks for miles. That's just oppressive, you know, like, but especially in the context that we know the genre is, a lot of when he's just in the fields, it feels very stifling and choked of overgrown wilderness. And it was really a good setup.
One of the things I thought was interesting about that, especially talks with regards to it being the railway tracks. Like I live relatively rural, and we've got several of those tracks where it's sort of like an old railway track that's been turned into a path. You know, you get cyclists and runners down there. Cool. But this idea of like you are trapped on that path. Like it's almost like you know, although he sort of goes off it, this event was almost inevitable. Like he was walking towards this constantly. Like you say, he was hemmed in by either embankments or bridges and everything. Like there is no diversion other than this destination. So,
you know, that actually makes me think of Stand By Me. Exactly that, with the train, taking the train tracks to see the body, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this thing of sort of like, it's an inevitable path. Like you are on a path, and it's sort of the only. This is your. I mean, destiny sounds a bit probably too heavy, but like this journey is inevitable. Like this was an inevitable outcome. And so you're right about the dread. So from the offset, you're like, he's surrounded by nature. He's a bit pissed off about nature, which I kind of thought was funny as well. Like, you know, he's like, I'm not entirely sure why I've done this. Like, I don't like nature, but it felt like the thing to do. So he's obviously not like a, you know, he's not a rural person. So another reason why you sort of feel like, oh, he's out of his element. So, you know,
Can you explain to me what he might mean by, because I'm not from the country, right? What does he mean by the Wirral Way? Well, what do you think he means in that?
The Wirral Way. So I actually think I was wondering about this. A Wirral is like I think it's like a small stream. So I read it sort of like it's going to be again one of those sort of paths that sort of like, okay, that's a, you know, like you know, when you do go walking, you have those well-trodden paths.
Yeah.
I assumed it was one of those where he was like, okay, that's the sort of, it's all been sort of, he's just following the paths, and there's a sort of,
okay, so he's venturing off the beaten track, as it
were. It's sort of like he's got the railway track, and then someone's gone, you get to a field and there's like a star, and you go, oh, I'm going to go through that field, there's a bit of a path through the field, so I'm going to go that. So he's left the main track, but it's still it's a track, but it's not like a well-trodden path. But yeah, so like you say, off the beaten track's probably is a good way to describe it.
And yeah, so he's following his desire, and he's maybe bites off more than he can chew. You know what? It's interesting. It's interesting how I was kind of describing the way that Campbell writes in this kind of meandering way, because he continues when Bryant then meets this old woman next to a bungalow, right? And even the way in which Campbell describes the woman, or how Bryant notices the woman, it's almost like meandering around her features. It's never like in a way, it's not a really straightforward way to describe a character, would you say?
Yeah, it's you're right. It's that thing of the absence of a direct description tells you there's something not right.
Yeah,
because he's not saying like, it's a brunette, or she's brunette and she's this and she's that and she's got, wearing this clothes and she's this height. It's very much sort of like he describes the smell. Her perfume is strong, and there's sort of like she's obviously elderly. But you're right, he's sort of dancing around the edges of this description.
Yeah.
But you're supposed to be sort of in the point of view of Bryant, this protagonist. And there's a point of view at some point where like it never feels like he's really paying attention. Like he's always sort of like, you say about meandering, he's more like, oh, this has happened, I'll just, like this, all right, I'll help her out. Like he, at no point does he feel proactive in any way. He's just sort of like stumbled across it and constantly it's like, all right, well, I'll try that. All right, well, I'll do that. Like it's never, he doesn't stride up like a hero and be like, well, of course I'll help you in the house. It's more of all right, I'll do that.
No, you're right. I think now that you say that, it feels like a lot of his decisions are almost not his own. It is that linear pathway. So she asks him to go into the house, like as we're made to feel like she's locked out or something like that.
Yeah,
it's a really overgrown place, and there's a window. She kind of beckons him to a kitchen window, and he has to squeeze through it, and he kind of gets stuck, and then she all of a sudden she's up there pushing him through. I found that really terrifying. First I found it funny because it made me think of Winnie the Pooh stuck in a hole, but then I thought that there's an element of this, and I might be going a bit too big too soon, but I felt that there was a really interesting element of like feminine horror in this one, because it's focused on this old woman and going into her house. And like, if you were to think of it in like a Freudian kind of sense, it's like, going into her house, as it were, she's pushing him inside, and now he's stuck in there seemingly.
Yeah. The other thing as well is, besides that is, because you're right, like it's her house. It's always described as like, he never questions, because she's elderly and she's a woman, he never questions her as a threat. It's always like, oh, she must be trapped outside. She is the one that's, the damsel in distress, as it were.
Yeah.
But one of the things I find interesting is, again, sort of that rural thing. You can see them sometimes when you drive down country paths, or even on the motorway, sort of like in this country. You'll have a hillside, and you'll see a farmhouse, and there'll be nothing around it. And so this idea of this bungalow being in the middle of nowhere, although it's strange, it isn't unheard of.
Sure.
And again, so for this thing of like this elderly couple to have lived here, like again, like in my head, this head canon, you're like, okay, they've been there their entire life. They're kind of reclusive. They're a bit unusual. And so it starts to not so much folk horror, but this idea of sort of like countryside horror, this idea of sort of like, these are outside of this straight away by the sort of, via their isolation, they are outside of sort of like social norms.
Yeah.
And straight away, so my head's already screaming. Again, I think this comes from knowing the genre. I'm going like, no, like this is wrong.
It's that very much that kind of like Deliverance-esque kind of backwards, the fear. It also, at this point where he's gone into the house, because we haven't mentioned this, but there's a lot of mention of the buzzing of flies. Like even before he meets the woman, there's this buzzing, and then there's buzzing of flies around her, and the other thing is the smell, like her strong perfume. And then when he gets inside the house, it really smells of like decay, and he's in the kitchen at this point, so it's like decayed food and or whatnot. And like I say, like I'm not really a big horror person, but like some ones that have stood out for me that I really liked, but equally because they terrified me, but I guess that's the point, right? Was is it Cormac McCarthy's The Road?
Yes.
I read both the book and watched the film with Viggo Mortensen, and The Walking Dead. But I've never seen the show, but I played the Telltale games.
Oh, okay.
Like
Yes.
Choose Your Own Adventure, and in both of those, there's like flies and cannibalism, and for some reason those things just really creep me out. Like there's in The Road, he and his son are really desperate for food, and he's not well, and they find a bomb shelter, I guess, with food, but there's this kind of element of threat of the other,
Yes,
out there in this rural place, like you're saying, like with this bungalow, and just the terrifying thing of, do you go in, what's in there, and flies, decay, flesh, that stuff just really kind of grosses me out. So it was really that kind of triggered me when he goes into the house in this instance.
Oh no, yeah, I the moment he starts to describe the kitchen, and it's the bathroom. When he goes into the bathroom, and he starts to describe it, and it's got he says like a fur of talcum powder on things, and that it like literally made my skin crawl. Like the description is horrible, and that you say this constant buzzing of flies, is this sort of portent of something else that's coming. There's always this other, and like that he's almost like trying. He's the hilarious thing is like this. He's looking for this key. And when he gets in, like there's a key snapped off in the lock of the front door, and he seems to almost like dismiss it. He's almost like, "Huh, that's unfortunate. I'll carry on looking." And he does. The thing is, he does like a proper look.
Yeah.
He looks under a sofa. He looks in all the room. He looks under a bed, and I'm like, okay, where does he think this is? I'd have gone. Well, it's not in that tray. It's not in that tray. Like. Yeah.
It's not a man look, that's for sure.
He does seem to be quite. He seems quite committed to this look around. But Campbell,
and then throughout the search, the old woman just seems to appear in these windows and is watching him, isn't she? And that's kind of, you start to kind of suspect a bit more. Like he does. He's like, well, so that was quite quick for an old woman, or did she really climb up there just to look in that window? And so there's a bit of a change in perspective.
Yeah, and I kind of love that, because he goes from the room to room, and like he says, because the surround of the bungalow is all undergrowth, like it's really overgrown, and so he's considering it, going like, well, she must have really moved to get through the undergrowth to get to that window, to be like peering in, and it culminates in the bedroom, this voyeurism of the woman. First he goes in, and he's sort of, again, it's still filthy. The bed is disgusting. It's covered in dust. There's an imprint in the middle, which is obviously, he says like, it's clearly been used recently. And he looks under the bed, nothing there, can't find this key. And then he looks over, it's like a dresser or like a chest of drawers or something, and pinned above it a set of photographs. And actually, no, because I think I've slightly jumped forward, because there's another set of photographs on the wall, isn't there, before he goes in the bedroom?
Yeah, he's in the living room, I guess, and there's some magazines, and they look. It was kind of alluded that they were kind of sexy magazines, like maybe some BDSM or something like that, like a bit kinky kind of stuff. That's how I took it.
That's
anyway.
because he's the Bryant's a bit like, oh, that's a bit unusual, but don't judge. Fair enough.
He's not a kink shamer, Bryant, is he?
No, he's really laid back about everything, isn't he, this guy?
I think the thing he was more horrified by in that situation was he then saw that she was watching him, so he was a bit like, oh, did she see me looking at those saucy magazines?
Because he then sees there are like 6 or 7 photographs of her with different men. And it's her progressively getting older, and so she's sort of like
wedding photographs.
That's right. Yes, and so he sort of like sees her as these different husbands, and he sort of chuckles to himself in that, as a sort of like she clearly gets around a bit.
Yeah, had a bit of a life.
Yeah, and that then leads to these photographs in the bedroom of the old woman, elderly in explicit positions, and as you said, like BDSM and other stuff. And again, he's not willing to judge, but he's a bit like, okay, I don't really want to look at these. I don't need to see them. but then he spots that she's watching him looking at the photos, and like you said, it feels that like there's that voyeuristic nature of sort of like she, and he even says it like, I think she wants to see me seeing these photographs.
That's right. It was very explicit, that part. I think that he got that there was some intent, that he started to realize there was a bit of intent going on.
Yeah. And that really creeped me out, because that's really sort of predatory behavior. And as you said, sort of from the idea of this being because this is feminine horror, I think there's an element of femininity to it, and it's unusual to have this. She's elderly and she's a woman, and yet you are starting to feel like she's a predatory character and potentially dangerous.
Well, I think part of the growing dread of it and tied into that feminine horror thing is when he first goes in there, because like you said, outside's completely overgrown, it's not well kept. Inside, now that he's inside like her house, as it were, and it's really messy and dirty, so there's this kind of assumption that, oh well, a woman should a woman should keep up her home, so she's obviously not been in here for a long time. But then, like you say, he starts to notice more recent things like an imprint. Oh, this has been used, or oh, here's a very recent wedding photograph of her, and now these explicit photos are of her now, so she has been in here. So that kind of corrupts this idea of she's in here and she's upkeeping the home and all that type of thing. So there's something quite sinister bucking our expectations. Yes,
exactly. I mean, it feels more like a lair than a home.
That's right. That's a good way to put it.
And because the idea of like a black widow, like a spider, sort of came to mind reading this, especially with the flies and stuff. But it's he goes into the final room, this locked room, it's bolted at least, and he opens it up. It's a small room, and there's a tin of cat food in there that's gone off. There's never a mention of a cat, so I'm assuming somebody else is eating that. And then he finds that where the buzzing of the flies is coming from, there's a body on the bed, and he says that this thing is covered in flies. The flies are in its eyes, its mouth, or its body, and then it starts to move. And I don't know if you've ever seen the film Seven.
It made me think of Seven for sure.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I feel I have like a visual memory, and so it took me right back to that scene of Seven of the guy tied to the bed. Yeah, I'm like, oh god, terrified.
You know what? It's funny because that was only the second Seven reference I got in this, because this kind of train track, this linearity, this whirlpool that we've been talking about. My first thought before we even get to that room was the head in the box, that where Brad Pitt's character's like, he doesn't want to go there, but he has to go there.
Yes.
There's that inevitability. And so that's the first time I thought about it. And when we get to the room, 100% that victim that we find on the bed. Because when Bryant walks into the room, the buzzing, because sometimes he starts saying that the buzzing of flies sounds almost like groaning.
Yes.
And that's a bit of foreshadowing, isn't it? That's kind of working us up to this idea that maybe it is groaning. And so when he gets to the room, there's a sheet over what looks like a figure, and it's kind of moving around. And so he's thinking, oh God. But when he opens it up, it looks like a corpse, right?
Yeah.
Like covered in flies, and they're all buzzing around and they fly away. And so he thinks, oh, okay, so it was just the flies that were moving. But no, it's this, what he thought was a corpse, because it's so grey and putrid. I mean, it's got like gashes and gouges and bites on its shoulder. Yeah. He's like,
and he recognizes that they're recent, doesn't he? He says that he says, oh, and they're clearly recent. And it's the movement of this figure. I'm going to try and find it. But he says, the way it's described, it's lying in the bed, and it reaches out to him, and I'm going to find it. Here you go. It's the fact that it reaches out for him and it gyrates at him. And that was the bit that really bothered me. I was like, okay, that's really, really, really mad. There you go. There you go. So, okay, so he was stumbling away from the bed. He felt he was drowning in the air that was thick with dust and flies when the sound recommenced. For a moment, he had the thought so grotesque he was afraid he might both laugh wildly and be sick. The flies were swarming in the corpse's beard, but the sound was groaning after all. For the bearded head was lolling feebly back and forth on the pillow. The tongue was twitching about the greyish lips. The blind eyes were rolling as the lower half of the body began to jerk weakly but rhythmically. The long-nailed hands tried to reach for whoever was in the room. And that was like, so it's trying to, for want of a better phrase, I'm apologies for this, it's trying to fuck him.
No. You know what? I didn't get that nuance in there, but yeah, because it's the lower half and rhythmically, like Ramsey Campbell's really particular with the words he uses in this, isn't he?
Yeah.
So it's like, this is the point, and we'll probably come to back up that point later on. Yeah, that's really something, isn't it? After all of this guy still wants some. And you know what? It's really interesting that you brought up that thing where he says, Bryant was afraid he might both laugh wildly and be sick, because there was a standout sentence in the previous page that I read that I've thought just encapsulated this whole story. It says, Bryant found himself smirking uneasily, as if at a joke he didn't quite see, but which he felt he should.
Yes.
And I feel like that's really like kind of encapsulates his whole misadventure here. Something he kind of knows something is afoot, but he's not quite there yet, and so he keeps on going down this rabbit hole.
Yes, and you, as we said before, like the reader, you're clearly going like, something's wrong here. Like there's an off ramp. Take it. Like this is not to go any further. And he's constantly sort of like you say, he's not quite paying attention to the world around him enough for it to click into place to say like, yeah, this is wrong. So he's sort of like just chuntering along. Once he finds the corpse, though, that's when it sort of like it kicks in. He steps out into the corridor, and the old woman has actually entered the house, and so sort of, and she has, you shudder, and I think as rightfully so, she has disrobed basically, and it is now quite clear what her intent is for Bryant, and this is where, and I was curious about this, Bryant, because the thing is, like, he's identified there's a bed, there's a sofa, there's stuff in the bathroom, there's stuff throughout. His attempt to get away is to throw a glass milk bottle at a window. And you're sort of like, oh, Bryant, you seem a little bit thick, if I'm perfectly honest.
Yeah, just even the description of it. Where was it? But he talks about, it's almost like, oh, here it is. He grabbed the nearest bottle, though his sweat and the slime of the milk made it almost too slippery to hold.
Yeah.
And that really stood out for me, because when I was reading this, I was thinking, about feminine horror and this thing of like abject horror. In my course, we had a module on psychoanalytic. It was called Psychoanalytic Culture and Society, and we had a session on the abject, and we looked at artists like Frida Kahlo and Anna Mendieta, and Frida Kahlo is probably one of the most famous ones, where it was because she suffered lots of like injuries and physical problems over her lifetime, and so a lot of her artwork was really about like drawing out that pain, but also like some of her strength that she found through the pain. And so a lot of the thing with the abject and the abject kind of horror is this bodily stuff that I was talking about, cannibalism, like raw meat, blood, pus, sweat, cum, vomit, all these bodily functions, and it's interesting because one of the things that we think of as like this, when you talk about the abject, is the skin that forms on the top of milk.
Yeah,
it's just this kind of, some people get really icky about it because it feels like physiological,
Yes,
and like with the buzzing of flies, it's almost like we have this evolutionary distrust when we hear the buzzing of flies. It sounds makes us think of like rotten meat. So
Mm.
evolutionary, we are like wary of that because it's going to make us sick. And how Campbell talks about the slime of the milk, it just brings up that real body horror. And then it describes her, and yeah, in this interesting way of like feminine horror, like kind of creating this monster out of women. It describes her as coming after him with her long arms outstretched, her grey breasts flapping.
Yeah.
She was licking her lips as best she could, relishing his terror. But just the idea of these grey breasts flapping around just was kind of comical to me. It kind of drew me out of it in a way.
Yeah, it is. No, I agree. It's almost, you see that the sort of the abject terror of it is almost like it's almost the ludicrousness of it as well. Like it's so extreme, this elderly woman, and we'll get to what she is shortly, but like this elderly woman has trapped you, has disrobed, and is now chasing you around her house. It would work it would work in The Shining, or it would work in Benny Hill. Like,
yeah.
And either way, it's going to be terrifying. But like, this could easily be as a comedy as a horror, because it is that ludicrousness, that abject, where you're sort of like this is just, as you say, your revulsion at this, and especially because you now know that there's more to this, and it's it almost crystallizes the filth, doesn't it, in the house at this point, when you're like, okay, this is, they're corrupt inside and out, and that bit, it just creeped me out properly when she starts chasing him, although he's a little inept at his escape.
Well, I think that does speak to Ramsey Campbell's like skill, that us talking about it now, it can sound silly, but the way he's woven this web, like, to use your spider analogy, it's fucking terrifying when you read it. Even though, because like, when you get that thing of, because we've kind of positioned Bryant as a bit of a backseat kind of passenger to his own misadventure, but now this is the moment where he's really like, he needs to get out, and he's trying, and like you say, he's not doing a very good job, but he's aware of these things, and even to the point when now he's like finally finds the key and he gets it in, and he's so terrified of what's going on, but he has the clarity of mind to be like, there's been one broken key in this house, and I don't want this to be another broken key. I really have to think about this.
Yeah, because he tries to turn it, and he's like, I don't want to turn this the wrong way because I don't want to break the key. And that's because I do like that moment when because he does escape and he gets away and he leaves the old woman to her sort of distress. But one of the things I want to pick up two things, because the last word of this whole story is again, the last statement is, as he backed away, floundering through the undergrowth, he saw that she was mouthing jerkily. Again, she said. So it's obviously going back to the title of the story. But there's two elements in this. Right? So those people, those men in those other the wedding photos, like, you fill in the blanks. Your mind can go crazy on this. Like, did she kill them all? Is the fate of the bearded man, who is the last photograph? So it's her husband. It's her last sort of husband or lover or whatever. She's killed him or kept him in this sort of state, this semi-alive state. And she's obviously done it repeatedly, and so like she's looking for a next victim, which is what Brian, I think, it's intended to be. Going back again to this idea of it being a trap, and because he says at one point, again, I might look for the description, but when he does sort of describe her at one point, he sort of suggests that she may have been attractive when she was younger. And so again, you sort of have this idea, you're going back to this idea of the feminine, of her using her beauty and stuff to entice men into this building.
Yeah.
And then taking advantage of them. And so I find that quite interesting. But the other point is she dead?
Oh, that's interesting.
I was like, she's elderly, but the way that they describe it, because then she has the flies all over her as well, and it describes them going in her mouth and over her face, and she doesn't really react to them.
Yeah.
And so you have this element of filth, this idea, like you say, of this abject, this sort of the revulsion and stuff. But I was like, okay, she's either that, or is she a walking corpse? Is she a zombie? I don't know, and that's why I'm sort of like, so is she dead?
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's really interesting, especially because of the kind of corpse, not corpse element of her partner. I wonder if it's a comment on the abject, on like where people can be like, because of the cyclical nature of this is like her sixth lover, the bearded man, and the state of the house, and that is like her life in a normative way is dead.
Yes,
all she lives for is this game.
Yeah.
And like you say, it finishes with again, because we didn't mention, he throws it with Bryant throws the milk bottle, as you said, it smashes, and he like stabs her up. He like smashes her up and everything.
Yeah.
And that's what gives him the opportunity to leave. So after all of that, she's all like, that kicked it up a gear for her, and she's like, oh yeah, again,
take it to the next level. yeah. I like you, sir.
So yeah, that corpse thing, I think she's alive. I think that the dead thing is more symbolic, that the rest of her life, and because it kind of reflects on Bryant, right? Like he's feeling a bit lackadaisical to go on this jaunt as it is. And because he does mention about inside, although it's filthy and everything, it has all the trappings of like middle class nonsense, like from his perspective, trinkets and collections and things like that. So I found that was maybe like Campbell's maybe commenting on like middle class, like I don't know, fatigue or apathy, and so maybe there's something in exploring this kink, and that was Bryant and the old woman are kind of the same, but just exploring it from different angles. Yeah, no,
I like this, like that idea actually, because you I think you're onto something. This idea of, like he does describe the trappings, doesn't he? In every room, every single room he goes into, he has this idea of there is this normality hidden under all the dust and the dirt and stuff. Like even in the bathroom, the sort of lotions and potions and all that kind of stuff. It's all there. And you say about the trappings, it makes me wonder then if, like you said, this has been a game for this woman for a long time. Like, she's done this again and again, like a Black Widow. Like, she's killed these men off, for want of a better phrase, like fucked them to death. I wonder if she's just reached a point in her life where, like there's some level of psychopath where, like, all this was a facade. Like, okay, I've got to keep up this facade of cleaning the house and having the trinkets and the, like you say, the doilies and all that kind of stuff. And then at one point she's just gone, there's no point anymore.
Yeah.
There's no point maintaining this facade anymore. And she is just living her natural state.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's like the American Psycho, isn't it? The kind of the trappings of that 80s Wall Street excess. It's like that, but in the Northern England rural variety. But that's interesting how you say that, because that makes me think of a thought I did have about the feminine horror. And it's like, is this like vilifying women and femininity or that type of thing by casting these things as a problem? But then equally, I would say maybe it doesn't, because she is rejecting this humdrum middle class housewoman kind of life for a life of like wanton kinky sexuality. And think of all the ways that the patriarchy has repressed women's sexuality, and it's like, yeah, lady, like fill your boots.
yeah. Well, one of the things, to look at that, I think that's a really good point, because she's living off the beaten track. So as we've identified, like there's either the train track, which is this thing that you're hemmed in. It's you're trapped on this sort of like linear path, And so she's off that. She's off the beaten track. She is living away from society. She's finally got. It seems like she's got to this point in her life where she's released herself from the trappings of this and just left them to decay around her. But more than that, like I say, she's obviously used that sort of the idea of the feminine to attract the men in. But then, as she's gotten older and stuff, like probably works less and less to now. But she's almost, I don't know if I regret the phrase, but animalistic. Like she's at a base animal self. And that's where you go, she's sort of like almost like you be you.
yeah.
In a horrific and horrible way.
Yeah. And I think I know what you mean by animalistic. Because I think what we're saying is it's like removed from that social conditioning that what a woman can and can't do with their body, and we say like, it's a problem, or maybe it gets she's less successful with age. But that corpse on the bed, he still wanted a piece, didn't he? As soon as he was roused from his slumber. So maybe she was making converts. And you know what? Maybe Bryant does come back.
Maybe. Yeah. There's a second follow-up to it again and again. But yeah, I mean, you could say that. I mean, what I would say is we don't know what the relationship. This is the thing. You don't know what the relationship is between her and this thing that's locked. It's locked in the room. There's a tin of cat food or dog food that sort of like, has been left for months. It instantly starts moving. It's blind for a start. So when it feels the presence of a person in the room. So it's almost like that. This person, this like I said, this corpse-like person, the bearded man, is almost conditioned, like Pavlovian conditioning, sort of like it's responding to things of like, well, if I do this, maybe I'll get food, or maybe I'll get some sort of pleasure.
That's a good point, the Pavlovian thing, because that's what actually made it quite creepy, and that harking back to that Seven kind of comparison, just what it would take to just survive. And the thrusting and stuff. You know what? It kind of did make me chuckle. That was another part that made me chuckle when Bryant recoils in horror, runs out of the room, and then like locks the room again.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, like, mate, like this is a really horrible thing. You've found what you assume is the victim of this old woman, and who needs help, like drastic medical help, and your like response is just to lock him back in the room.
You're like, nope, I'm done with that. Move on. One thing I would say is that you say this is, this film had this story has all the, that grossness, that sort of the. It's not like gory, is it? Like it's no. Just that filth. It's quite revolting, but it has got like a real black humor to it. Yeah. Like there is a sense of humor to this story. As we've gone through, like the fact, like you said, that Bryant's sort of like he wades, he sort of like meanders through this story. He's never sort of fully aware of his own story. Some of the descriptions, and like you say, the moment he's throwing the milk bottle at the window, and you're just like, oh god, you're such a pillock. Like, I'm going like grab anything, grab the old woman, throw her through. But yeah, I do feel there's like a dark humor to this as well, which I kind of appreciate throughout.
Yeah, I love the part where he first sees the explicit photos and then senses that she's watching, and just that like he's just like feels like he's just such a prude. Like I feel like his life, if he thinks that that's weird, wait for what's going to happen in the next 10 minutes, pal, because your life's going to be changed.
I like it when he first sees them, and he's like, it is that film like a car crash. He's like, I don't want to look at them, but like I can't not look at them. And there are these little moments dropped in through the story that are actually fantastic. What I would say as well is you mentioned about this guy, obviously the bearded man's trapped in this room. It's the event that's happened, and the story ends with Bryant getting away, as he sort of like he gets away from the house, and it ends obviously with the woman still alive, and she says again, do you think, I mean, this is traumatic, but do you think like, he goes to the police? Like what's the next bit after this? Like,
yeah. I don't know. I wonder if he doesn't.
Yeah.
I just don't feel like Bryant's a real like proactive guy.
Yeah, I agree.
Because he's also like now complicit, like because he's just like gashed her up.
Mm.
Like
you can
what's
claim you could claim self-defense, but then they'd be like, she's a 90-year-old woman, dude.
Yeah.
Like, you know,
Yeah.
like, what were you
grey
expecting?
breasts flapping against a broken milk bottle? Nah.
Yeah. So yeah, it is a weird one. But you're right. There's a part of me that wondered that, because I was thinking, like, does he go to the police, or does he just make his way back to the railway track, joins the regular, and is like, yeah, I'm not going to talk about that again. That never happened. Get back.
The Wirral way isn't so bad now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Stick to the main path. And so I was wondering that, like, you know, is he proactive enough to go off and contact the police and do all that, or does he just sort of go, well, I'm not going to talk about that again.
Yeah,
move on. Yeah,
I think it's the latter. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I think so too. Yeah, I do. As you say, Brian, he's not the most proactive of people. One thing, sort of like, you know, is there anything else about this story you wanted to point out or highlight as we've gone through it?
No, I think we've covered a lot of the themes I thought about, just in that terms of the abject and the feminine horror. I think because I'm, like I said, I'm not a massive horror buff, but those are some things I've kind of quite connected with. They're kind of because it's not like there's cannibalism, but the thing with the biting and the scratching being fresh, that and the flies, that all really resonated with me. I thought that Campbell was really good at like I said, that kind of whirlpool, that meandering path of getting to the point to delay the inevitable just enough. And I think it was a really good way to have Bryant to be a bit spacey, like because we just, as the audience, we just know slightly more than him or suspect it before he does. And I guess that's probably quite a common or a successful element in horror, I guess. You know, it's that kind of, like you said at the very start, like, no, don't go in there. You fool.
Yeah. It's the kind of thing, you are going, like, don't go up the stairs, don't open that door. Like, this is, something is wrong. And the fact he doesn't identify it, like you say, I think, there's it's one of those, like you said, with great stories, you can sort of read elements into it, like that idea of satire, because we've talked about the feminine and the obviously the abject, the disgusting and the filth, all that kind of thing. This idea of being out of society, off the beaten track, but this idea of sort of him being a little bit spacey, as you say, you can read that. I mean, this is 1981. This was released, so the early yuppies and also that sort of, you said about the 80s and stuff. But there's still that idea of sort of just being in the rat race, sort of being in automatic, and just doing what you got to do. And so sort of like he's sort of like, not taking in his surroundings, and he's actually just sort of like head down, carrying on. This is what life is. And he, like I said, because he even says, he even acknowledges that the walk in the countryside is sort of like, it's the sort of thing you do. He's not proactively looking to explore the countryside. It's just something you do. And so I like this idea of sort of Bryant representing this sort of unaware populace. Then he's sort of shocked into realization to be like, oh no, there's some like, messed up stuff on the outskirts of, that regular road, that sort of the mainstream. And so, I think there's some really cool stuff in this to sort of, tap into.
Well, you know what? I wonder, because we talk about what happens after. I think he does go back to the rat race a little bit, because this was a dalliance. And Tony and I, on his podcast, we talked about, on our Blankets episode, we talked about the manic pixie dream girl, and how that trope can kind of be used as a bit of a dalliance for the protagonist, to see what life could be like outside of this structure, this track that has been laid out for them. And maybe in some ways the old woman is like his manic kinky goth girl. It's like a little dalliance from the rat race to see. And so I hope maybe he doesn't go and call the police, because he's not like that. Maybe he does go back to the rat race and feels like the beaten path was a bit too much, but hopefully he's taken a little bit of kink with him.
Yeah, you
He's
never
not
know.
quite the same guy.
He's carrying a little bit of it with him. I kind of like that idea that, like, it's spurred him on to new and different things. Like, he goes home to sort of his girlfriend or his wife, and he's like, I just want to try this one thing that's new.
Can I just cover you in milk slime?
Yeah. That's not clean. No, it's true. I think you're right. I think, it feels like that sort of thing. And also this idea of sort of this, as they call it, the splattergore sort of era. The visceral nature of some of the descriptions is really cool. I really enjoy some of that. But would this lead you to probably explore a little bit more of Ramsey Campbell or horror stories in this sort of vein?
Yeah, I think so. I'm really impressed in how much of a journey he can take you on in such a short story. I think that was really, really well woven. And yeah, I think I'd probably read some more. I like the short story element to it, because it means I'm like, I know there's an exit point in the near future.
Yeah, I think I love a good novel, but like say short stories have got like a good short stories have really got a there's a reward to it being quite short, because you sort of, like you say, it's sort of a bite-sized thing that you're like, I don't know how are they going to get off this in like the next 3 pages.
Yeah.
And so I think that's sort of part of it, the sort of part of the fun.
I think because there has to be an economy of narrative, but within it there can be such nuance and symbolism to unpack. So yeah, I liked it. Yeah, thank you for recommending it.
No,
and it was your first read as well.
It was.
What
was
your kind of takeaway?
No, dude, like I say, I've read a little bit of Ramsey Campbell before, so I was aware of him, but never this story, and I've heard of it. So I really enjoyed it. Again, it's sort of it's a well-rounded, sort of as you said, it's a well-written journey of a story that makes you think, like you say, you sort of you can dissect it, and you can come in and go, oh, what the hell happened next? And so I really enjoyed it, actually. There's a couple more, and the other 2 stories I have to remember now. I can't remember what the 2 of the stories were that I said. There was The Frolic by Thomas Ligotti,
and The Sentinel was the other one,
and The Sentinel, yes, by Arthur C. Clarke, which is a science fiction story that sort of inspired 2001. So a variety of stories there. So I'm glad, this is good. This is a good, like you say, horror story to sort of to be getting on with. And I really enjoyed it. So and thank you, Blake, for coming on as well.
Thank you for having me.
About it. No, yeah, it's been great. Sort of a newbie to the sort of 20th Century Towers, but a regular in the Comics in Motion family. So it's as you call it, the Comics in Motion verse. It's a great group to be a part of, like some podcast commune of sort of people, right, like-minded people. It's fantastic. But anything you want to plug before we wrap up? Anything else you want to plug or let people know about?
So Tony always asks me this, and I'm not big on social media, but if you do want to hit me up on Twitter and talk about any of this stuff, these themes, I'm always up for a chat. It's blake.byles, that's BYLES, and you can search for me on YouTube as well. I have a few videos on there that I've done for my course, like video essays. One was on agoraphobia as like an urban condition, and looking at hostile architecture and gentrification, like Grenfell Towers and that type of thing. And the other one was a video on QAnon and evangelical Christian like interrelationship.
Wow.
So yeah, look for me on YouTube there.
I'm going to check those out. That's actually, I like that, especially that second one. That's already tickled my fancy. I like that side of that. I'll put a link in the bio below.
Thanks.
So people can access that. So yeah, ladies and gentlemen, there you go. So go check out Blake's YouTube and go bother him on Twitter. It's always good fun to do.
But ladies, some bothering.
Yeah, it's always fun. Some social media bothering. But ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much as always for listening on. I hope you've enjoyed our conversation. I hope you enjoyed the story. You went and sort of found it again, and there are more to come. We're going to be carrying on with our next sort of cycle on the story. So we've had our story time. Now it's going to be then and again, and we're going to be joined by my brother from another mother, Julian Darius from Stories Out of Time and Space, and we're going to be doing Yojimbo and A Fistful of Dollars as a story as a film comparison. So I'm really looking forward to that. But if you like what we're doing, go to your podcast catcher, leave us a review, 5 stars, 4 stars, whatever you want, Any of your feedback is appreciated. But if you really like what we do and you want to hear more conversations like this, go check out our Patreon. And for as low as sort of £5 a month, you can get hours and hours of more podcasts and behind the scenes content. So go check that out. There's a link down below. But Blake, thank you very much for coming on this podcast. It's been wonderful talking. I've really enjoyed it. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. And we shall talk again soon.